I stepped into the smoke-filled vestibule of the commuter train. Outside the window, winter forests and snow-covered fields were flying by. A man standing in the vestibule glanced at me and then at my substantial sports bag. I looked into his eyes, not averting my gaze. A metallic female voice announced the next stop, and I got off at the platform. Around me, as far as the eye could see, was an unbearably bleak scene. Under a leaden midday sky stood black houses and a train station building with boarded-up doors. In the distance, a forest loomed darkly. I had come to the village of Stone Ravine for a month, hiding from court proceedings. The company I worked for had violated some regulations, and the prosecutor called me as a witness in court. I claimed to be sick, and given the circumstances, my boss granted me a month's leave. Initially, I wanted to visit my relatives, but upon reflection, I decided to go to my aunt's old house in the village. The snow was almost knee-deep, and it took me a while to reach my house and about 20 minutes to clear the snow from the gate to the door. The house was chillingly cold. It took almost an hour to get the ancient stove burning. Over the next 2 days, I settled in, tidied up the house, and even explored the surroundings. I had plans to make some repairs, but the cold prevented me from working with the building materials outside, so during the day, I mainly read, and in the evenings, I listened to the radio. It seemed that I had plenty of boring days ahead, so I leisurely spent my vacation away from civilization. There were almost no neighbors. The village houses to the right and left of mine were occupied only in summer, and the neighbors from the house across the street had gone to the city to stay with relatives to weather the frost in a warm apartment. I would have lived in peace if not for an incident that happened about a week after my arrival. I was having dinner in the kitchen when I heard a knock at the door. At first, I thought I imagined it, but the knock repeated. Turning on the light on the porch, I approached the door. Through the window, I saw the silhouette of an old woman. My loneliness had sharpened my sociopathy, so I first ensured my axe was within reach, just in case, and then opened the door. An unpleasant-looking old woman stood before me, dressed in an old black-brown coat, with an ugly, wrinkled face. She smelled of urine and old age. I greeted her, and she immediately said, "Give me something to eat." God, her voice was so grating and elderly. "I have nothing, Granny," I replied. "I'll go to the store tomorrow." I had only a few cans of stew and some cereal left, which I didn't want to share, let alone cook for a smelly guest. The old woman kept whining, "Give me something to eat." I started getting angry. At first, pity awoke in me, and I wanted to give her a can of stew. I was already heading to the kitchen when she changed her tone and growled, "If you don't give it, I'll eat you." I immediately turned around and yelled at her, "Get out of here, old woman, get lost." Neither she nor I expected such a reaction from me. She spat at her feet and, muttering curses, headed towards the gate. I locked the door with a latch. I was shaking from how disgusting the situation felt. That wretched old woman had ruined my mood, and I spent the rest of the evening trying to entertain myself without success. Without realizing it, I fell asleep right in the chair in front of the stove. My sleep was restless. I kept dreaming that someone was wandering around my house, peeking in the windows. Then I dreamed that I went outside and shouted into the void, "Go away, damned one." After that, a figure in a black cloak with a scythe emerged from the darkness and walked away. I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. I needed to relieve myself. I decided to go outside, threw on an old sheepskin coat, put on my boots, and started wandering around my house, just like in my dream. As I expected, I found no traces of anyone's presence. The night snowfall had covered even the tracks of that disgusting old woman who visited me in the evening. I didn't want to sleep. It was pleasant to be in the fresh night frost, so I opened the gate and stepped outside. A barely visible trail of footprints led from my house to the end of the street. I saw something there. A figure, exactly like in my dream, stood at the end of the street. The only difference was that it didn't have a scythe. "Go away, damned one," I shouted in an unusually confident voice, smiling at the situation. I wasn't afraid. It felt like I was watching a movie rather than participating in a strange night walk. The shadow remained standing where it was. I squinted my eyes, thinking it was not a person but just a pole or tree, maybe something else, so I calmly turned around and walked back to the house. Just as I reached the porch, I looked back at where the shadow had been but saw nothing. I slept fitfully that night, frequently dreaming of faces in the windows. I often got up and shuffled to the kitchen to drink water. Closer to morning, when I fell asleep again, I had a completely different dream. I was a little boy playing in the summer near the house. The blue sky, green grass. I felt the warm rays of the summer sun on my body. Then I saw my young aunt coming out onto the porch, telling me it was time to go to the city. My uncle would pick me up by car. In my dream, I saw my chubby uncle, smiling and calling me. I woke up and strange thoughts crept into my head that dreams on Friday are prophetic, that seeing deceased relatives calling you is a bad omen, when suddenly, on the border of sleep and reality, my aunt's distorted face appeared before me, and a terrible high-pitched voice sounded in my head. "Take the cross, take my cross." I woke up completely from my own scream. In the morning, I found a cross in the time-blackened dresser and placed it next to my bed. I stared at it, trying to remember at least some prayers, but all I could mutter was, "God, Lord, save me." I decided to go to the store. When I reached the main street, rare passersby looked at me in surprise. No wonder a haggard, unshaven face and a drunken gait repelled the villagers. I managed to buy only half of the necessary groceries at the store. First, it was hard to carry them, and second, the constant headache prevented me from remembering what I needed to buy. The short winter day passed unnoticed due to household chores. Despite the fatigue from the illness, sleep wouldn't come. I decided to air the house and opened a small window. Sitting on the bed, I heard footsteps. The snow was crunching under someone's feet. Approaching the window, I saw a man walking down the street, nothing unusual. In the ventilated room, I eventually fell asleep. At exactly 3 a.m., I opened my eyes. Nausea hit me, impossible to ignore. I washed my face with cold water. The room was pitch dark. I started to panic uncontrollably. I felt that someone was standing behind me. I was too afraid to turn around and only whispered, "Lord, save and protect me." After a while, without opening my eyes, I crawled to the bed and fell into a sticky, feverish sleep. In the morning, I felt much better. I packed my things and prepared the house for my departure. The train to the city was scheduled to arrive at 4:30 in the evening, just as the sun was setting. At 4 o'clock, I locked the house and headed for the gate. Beyond the gate, I saw the same shadow that had been appearing to me since the beginning of my illness. I was gripped by a fear I had never felt before. That shadow was just standing by the gate, blocking my only exit. I couldn't move, my legs were trembling. I somehow opened the door and got onto the porch. My legs wouldn't obey, and I almost crawled on all fours into the room. Turning on the light, I saw a noose hanging from the ceiling with a shabby stool beneath it, which was usually in my pantry. I heard the sound of a departing train outside the window. I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them, the same unfortunate old woman was standing at the doorway to the room. I looked at her, then at the noose, then back at her smirking face. "You won't get me, bitch," I yelled. The old woman just turned and left. After some time, I followed her, but found neither her nor any tracks. Then I spent the coldest night of my life by the abandoned train station, waiting for the morning train. I won't tell you how I got to the city. I'll just say I spent almost 3 weeks in the hospital. I never went back to my aunt's house. My cousin only went to the village in the spring to check on the house. He told me everything was fine, but I recently learned that a homeless person who had committed suicide was found in the house. His body was discovered hanging by the returning neighbors.